Press the button, my friend.
The Out of Bounds Show is live from the Whiskey 61 Lounge in the Bank Plus studio.
Check it out.
Your SEC Insider Hit this morning is brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be blue, the official healthcare provider of the Out of Bounds Show. And the show is also presented by Mississippi Sports Medicine and Orthopedic Center, MississippiSportsMedicine.com. Friday Night Lights, powered by Mississippi Sports Medicine and Orthopedic Center. Mississippi State comes away with a good win on Saturday. It may not have been pretty, but winning in this league is highly coveted. You'll take everyone you can get, especially in the West. And they come away with a W in overtime. They kind of fell asleep for about an hour and a half during the game, and I think a lot of people are kind of scratching their head there as to why they went 9 straight possessions without scoring on offense. One of those possessions was a special teams touchdown by the little used, for whatever reason, Tulu Griffin, who is an absolute highlight reel waiting to happen. He's got 3 games left in his junior year, so the clock is ticking. He had a 57-yard catch, too. So when he gets it in space, he's got this team does not have a lot of this. He's got some wiggle and some speed. But Massimo Biscardi, to me, was there were others, Crumity and so on, but Massimo Biscardi was the MVP. When you've got those kind of stones and bells to hit 3 straight kicks in bad weather, pressure, all that, everything's going against you, pretty damn impressive from that young man. And I thought Cadillac missed on the second timeout. I thought it was too late. But the refs let him and that staff do whatever the hell they wanted all night, which I could not figure out. We welcome in Steve Robertson, 247 Sports, Gene's Page, the Boneyard Podcast. Steve joins us on the Dos Equis guest line. Steve, how about Massimo Biscardi, man? I mean, was that pressure-packed, bad weather, Cadillac's going to empty the tank on the timeouts? How impressed were you with that young man?
I was impressed, and I absolutely thought it was the right decision for Cadillac to do that based on State's place kicking the last couple of years. And, the guy just sat in there and just, hey, let's ride, I mean, of course, if he had missed one of the first 2, then all of a sudden Cadillac looks a little silly. But the reality of it is he took the best chance possible, presented the situation, and Biscardi comes through. And when's the last time State's had a big kick like that? I mean, maybe Derek DePasquale to force overtime against Arkansas years ago. I mean, it's like
That's right.
State hadn't had that pressure-type kick in a long time, and he comes through there and in many respects kind of saves the season, because that's a ball game, as you say, that State had in control. And you have these periods of malaise that have kind of plagued State this year. And that's probably my biggest issue, Bo, is that the same issues you had against Memphis, you had against Auburn, and that's got to get better. You got to be more consistent on offense. You can't have these periods where everybody just kind of goes to sleep and gets comfortable.
Man, Massimo Biscardi, what a dude last weekend. Like you said, they needed that shot in the arm, and that kid was and we talked to Steve. It's easy for all of us to kind of gloss over. How about the long snapper and the holder? Time and time again on a wet field and in some pretty crappy weather, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been an issue too. I mean, that was, when they had some of the field goal kicking issues, when you broke it down, you said, well, maybe there's a holding situation here. And they actually have changed the deep snapper there and got Hayes Hammond doing it now. And so, perhaps they figured some things out, but you've got to be able to execute in that situation. And they did.
What you just hit on it. They're in November and they're having these big lulls in games that go all the way back to Memphis. So 9 straight possessions on offense. Tulu took, housed the kick. It's great. Young man's electric. Don't know why he's not getting more touches, but whatever. This is like an hour and a half, 2 quarters, a quarter and a half. Why the lulls? What's happening, Steve?
That's a great question. And Leach has brought that up multiple times in postgame and says, we've got to learn to stand prosperity. And there have been times I think State has gotten the lead and then gotten comfortable and, kind of basically gone to sleep. And that's got to change. In order for State to win and get to 8-4 this year, they're going to have to at some point put together 4 quarters of quality football, and they've been incapable of doing that so far. And I really think back, if we're being honest, under the Leach tenure, I mean, maybe that Missouri game in 2020 is probably the game where you have maybe had continuity on offense the entire day. Maybe go back to LSU, but even in that LSU ball game, people forget State turned it over 4 times there, and still won the game handily. And if you play clean that day, you might have an epic win where you have absolutely just wiped the field with LSU. And so, and to give credit too, I mean, to Auburn, those
Sure.
guys came out and played hard football, and those guys get preschool too. It's not like we're always, it's not the Globetrotters versus the Washington Generals out there. And so, you've got to be able to go out there and compete. And I give Cadillac and that staff a lot of credit. They put in some new offensive wrinkles and gave State some problem with it. But at the end of the day, when the game was on the line, State made the big kick to tie it and get it into overtime, and then outplayed them in overtime and ultimately won the football game.
Why do you think the offense is regressing? 24 straight. I mean, this has been for a few weeks now. Kentucky, Alabama, they actually moved it a little bit better, but between the 20s. But that 9 straight possessions without scoring, 6 coming out of halftime against a hodgepodge staff at Auburn, 24 straight passes. You're tipping off to SEC defensive linemen and especially edge rushers that they don't have to worry about the run. So it puts an enormous amount of pressure on your offensive tackles, Steve, and Will Rogers. What do you see with this offense?
Well, the first thing I'll say, I thought the offensive line played their worst game of the year against Auburn, and not just because of the sacks. I think there were people in his face over and over and over again, and that's part of the issue. That's part of the issue. So, and I think you got to get some stuff kind of situated here in the next couple weeks, just because of the fact that Georgia defensive line is elite. State's played Alabama, LSU, Auburn. Those fronts are really, really good. This Georgia front is elite. And I think one of the things that we're seeing too is Mississippi State's kind of graduating a little bit offensively. You're not seeing drop 8 anymore. I think people have realized that Will Rogers will absolutely pick you apart if that's what you do. And so now people are trying to defense them differently, and now they'll have to adjust. Football is a game of adjustments. Now everybody's bringing more pressure, forcing him to get the ball out early. I thought Auburn did a great job kind of defending the flats and taking the check game away. So now, what's Leach do to counter that? Because this is a mimic league. Everybody, once they have some success, is going to mimic what everybody else does. And so you're not seeing drop 8. We're not hearing those complaints because they've addressed those. Well, now how do you handle this new fangled way that people are defensing this Mississippi State offense? That's what has to be corrected here in the next 3 weeks.
Derek Hall ate their lunch. Former Mississippi State commitment, Gulfport, Mississippi, ended up flipping to Auburn late. 8 tackles, 6 solo, 2 sacks, 3 for tackles for a loss. That guy was a machine. Steve Robertson, 247 Sports, Gene's page, the Boneyard podcast on the Out of Bounds show, and the Dos Equis guest line. Tulu Griffin, so they're next to last. MSU's offense is next to last in explosive plays, Steve. And to me, you may disagree, but to me, the game is predicated all on explosive plays this day and age. Can you generate them? Can you stretch a field? Can you go vertical? Or can you do it running plays from the line of scrimmage? Whatever. Tulu is their most explosive player, yet he doesn't get that many touches. He had 2 receptions. One was a 57-yarder, 1 for 1 yard. What's the deal? Does he deserve more time? I hear this. Every receiver on that, Austin Williams, Ra, Tulu, Wally, others have dropped the football this year. And I saw it in Bama LSU game too. Does he deserve more touches, Steve?
Well, he does. And the first thing I'll say is Derek Hall never publicly committed to Mississippi State. He was a lean throughout the process and ultimately did choose Auburn. So I just want the record to reflect that. But But yeah, I think the thing with Tulu too is tracking the football on the deep throw. There's been a couple times where State has thrown it basically over his head, and he hadn't been able to make that catch. I mean, Alabama's a pretty good example of that. But I think you've got to find a way to get the ball in his hands doing what he does well. And I don't know if that's not moving him eventually to the slot receiver spot, because I think that he's a guy that can take that slant or that 7-yard hitch, make a guy miss, and he's off to the races. And you saw an example of that on Saturday. And so I think maybe we're underutilizing him because we're having him play outside. I mean, that's just kind of the reality of it in my estimation. I think that he's a guy, that his route tree is maybe a little more limited than you'd like at this point in his development. And so maybe adjust and do what he does well, get him the football. And there have been some games, and Steve Spurrier Jr. said it, we got to feed him a little bit more, and they came out and they did. I guess it was against Texas A&M. They found a way to kind of get him the ball in space and let him kind of make some plays for you. But, in order for this defense, this offense to take the next step, you've got to do more in that intermediate passing game, which will, impact those safeties, kind of loosen the box up a little bit, because we're seeing a lot heavier boxes these days. State comes out, runs football well against Arkansas and A&M. So people are like, nah, you're not going to do that.
Right.
And so then that they've adjusted their coverage. And so, football, again, it's a game of adjustments. It's not in-game adjustments only. It's over the course of a season as you kind of realize how people are attacking you. And to me, that's the difference between a 7-win season and an 8-win regular season, is the adjustments that State makes in these final 3 weeks.
Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds show. Now, I'll give Leach this. He pulled the short straw in scheduling. He gets Georgia 2 of the first 3 years during his tenure. And MSU really doesn't ever play Georgia. What are they trying to do this weekend? Just get out of the game healthy? Georgia's awesome. How do you see it?
Well, here's the thing, too. And I had this discussion with some fans on Sunday. Everybody's like, well, I just hope that we can be competitive. I hope that we can graduate to a point that we start expecting to win these games. And at this point, you're not there. This Georgia team is incredible. They're number one for a reason. It's not some fluke. And they're probably the quietest number one team that we've seen in recent years. I don't know. They get enough respect. They're the defending national champions, and people just act like they're another team. But I'm eager to see how State handles maybe the logo on the side of the helmet. That was a problem against Alabama. Leach mentioned it, like we were scared of Alabama. I just want to see State come out there and punch them. You know what I'm saying? It's like they did in 2020. Like, we don't care who you are, where you're from, or what's in your trophy case. We're here to play a football game. And I think that would be maybe a step forward for State. It's just to go out there and play these guys head up and not be intimidated by the logo.
Crumity and Wheat were fantastic on Saturday. Boy, Crumity, he made his presence known on the first series, Steve.
Yeah, he did. Very first play of the game offensively. They give it to Tank Bigsby, and Crumity sheds the block and rides him to the ground. And I think that was good to see. And, we got him in postgame and talked to him about the targeting call that they picked the flag up on. That was for a moment there. I was kind of holding my breath. It's like this kid's gone through so much, and as soon as he gets back out here, he's about to be knocked out of a game. But he comes right back and plays really well. Credited with just 3 tackles and a sack and 1.5 tackles for loss. But he impacted the game, even though he didn't fill up the box score, and that could be big for State down the stretch. And he's still a little bit rusty, but you feel like maybe you get him through this week, and maybe those last couple ball games he can be pretty close to midseason form.
Better play call, Steve. Will to rah-rah late in the game on the long touchdown pass, or Leach folding up the chairs on the sideline and throwing them down?
I think it's absolutely Leach throwing the chairs down. There's so many people that have this false narrative when it comes to Leach, like he's not engaged or he's not doing the things he needs to do or showing emotion. He just shows it differently. But that was a good example right there of him just kind of having enough and saying, you know what, we're going to change this up, and you guys are not going to sit over here. And he joked yesterday. He goes, we had everything over there except for playing cards. Trying to get those guys engaged. And, I thought it was big because you've gotten complacent on offense. You've gotten comfortable, and he goes and does that, shakes things up, and then later in the ball game you have some sense of urgency, and you ultimately do what it requires to win the football game.
All right. So, Leach, I think their team is pretty average. All right. I think they'll finish 7-5, that's a compliment to Leach. And last year, I think they were I don't think they were ordinary last year, and they finished 7-5. So it shows that kind of his system and everything he's done works to a certain level and a better level than Mississippi State historically. But people are kind of asking, is there going to be a bump or a jump? Have they recruited well enough? Are the players getting developed at the rate they need to be? I think there's some positions, quite frankly, Steve, that aren't improving. I think the one spot where I was wrong on Leach, he's brilliant, he's amazing, phenomenal play caller, and the offense is pretty damn good. What I thought, because he had won at Texas Tech and Washington State for so long with Les, that he would be that he and the staff would be Dan Mullen-esque as far as developing players, and I don't think they are. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's maybe a little bit early to tell, just because 2020 was such a weird year. And, some people did a better job that year. I mean, you look up the road at Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, even though they finished that year 5-5, and he's attacked the portal. And so it's been a different philosophy, but you can't knock the results. I think when you look at this offense, when you look at, at all the metrics out there, scoring average is up, rushing is up. Will Rogers, I think, is maturing as a quarterback and doing a good job. But at the end of the day, it's about wins and losses. And there were a lot of people at the beginning of the year that said this could be a better Mississippi State team with the same record they had a year ago, just because of the schedule. I still think 8-4 is a possibility. And, you never know what these two teams are going to look like by the time you get to Thanksgiving when it comes to State and Ole Miss. But that ultimately will likely be, the game that decides the quality of this season. Is it a good year or is it a really good year? It's not going to be a great year, but it could be a really good year. And let's say you win that ball game and then somehow win the bowl game, and you end the year on a 3-game winning streak. You've got some juice heading into the offseason and the spring practice. And so, the story of this season has not completely been written yet.
Will Rogers with the 2 fumbles. Obviously, they were bringing pressure, but Will's got to take care of the ball in the pocket. What's your takeaway on those 2 turnovers?
I don't blame him for either of those. I think the pick is on him. I think that both of those fumbles are on your left tackle. I think both, especially that second one, and that's a major league play. Derek Hall beating the guy, not quite getting there, but being able to swat the ball down. And that's the thing. You look at that third quarter, it's just remarkable. State runs 20 plays, gets 40 yards, has the punter sacked because he fumbled the snap, and then has 2 punts for an average of 22 yards. I mean, it was a complete meltdown by the entire team. Usually you have, one mistake. But the defense kept getting the short end of the field early on. They forced a couple of field goals, and that's probably the difference in the ball game, to be quite honest with you. If Auburn cashes in and scores touchdowns there, we're having a different conversation today, and State's still not bowl eligible. But that's the thing I think about all this is like this special team stuff continues to persist. And to Leach's credit, he shakes up the staff. They bring in all new specialists, yet this thing's continue. So you can't really put your finger on what it is, but they got to find a way to fix it. It's their job to fix it. It's their responsibility to fix it. And they've got to hold people accountable and ensure those things don't happen moving forward.
What's the latest on Dylan Johnson?
Yeah, he wasn't quite 100%, and he's a gamer. He always wants to play. He'll be a little bit closer to 100% this week. And, they were careful with him last week. I don't know that he's full go again until the Egg Bowl, and that's not necessarily maybe a question about his health, but just I think you got to be careful with him. You don't want to get him hurt against Georgia, and you certainly don't want to, waste the good snaps that he has available against East Tennessee State. So, we'll see how things progress. But my hope is they'll be somewhat measured in how they utilize him the next 2 weeks, so that in that Egg Bowl game he will be much closer to 100%.
We had a listener on our Ag Up Equipment text line want to ask you a question. Steve Robertson, the Boneyard Podcast, Gene's Page 247 Sports on the Dos Equis guest line. Steve, can Tulu play running back? Spot duty.
I don't think so.
Not Marks and Dylan reps, but you've seen other teams in the last few years even in the NFL, put wide receivers at running back, give them a few snaps, whether it's Ole Miss or the San Francisco 49ers with Debo, among many others. If you're an athlete, you can usually make that happen. What do you see?
Well, I think you'd maybe have to move him to the slot to make that happen, to bring him in motion. I mean, you're not going to do that as an outside receiver. Could they utilize him in some wrinkles? I think you could. I'd like to see it, quite honestly. And I'm not saying you even motion him back, but just bring him on some jet sweep action and let him get the football with a full head of steam and perhaps get the edge out there. I think that's a wrinkle that could really be beneficial to Mississippi State. I just don't know if that's in the cards. You know what I'm saying? It's like one of those things that you look at and you think about how explosive he can be. And listen, he's still got some development to do. We all know that. Nobody's saying that he's a finished product, but I think he is being somewhat underutilized. And I would like to see him do that. I don't know if you motion him back there and let him start, from a halfback type stance, but I'd like to see them be a little more creative in how they get in the football.
All right. We'll leave it there. Steve Robertson, 247 Sports, Gene's page on the Dos Equis guest line. Steve, appreciate it, man. Thanks. Steve Robertson joined us on ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Let's go to the Ag Up Equipment text line. State Grad 98, who told me last week that my show was terrible, text us and says, no, this is Trez. Sorry. These texts are jumping. Trez says they are keeping Tulu fresh for the Liberty Bowl. What's the percentage chance that Bo attends the Liberty Bowl? That would be 0.
What's negative? Is there a negative chance?
Yeah, that would be 0.
At 7-5, you're trending for Vegas.
Ooh, I'd go to that.
Just throwing that out there.
I may not go to the game, but I'll go out there just to.
I think we would
give me an excuse.
We'd both have to go to cover the game, is what it sounds like.
It sounds like we would.
Sounds
even
like
if
we
I'm
would
there
need to cover
for
it.
a quarter before going to one of the cool restaurants in the Venetian.
I'd have to go because I want to check out the new stadium.
That's fair.
I mean,
enough.
it's a brand new, state of the art, $8 billion stadium.
I'm with you. So I'd go for a half.
Yes, correct.
And I don't. Who are you pulling? A Pac-12 team? Yeah,
I think that's right.
So I don't know who that would be. I don't know who's 6-6 or 7-5, maybe even 8-4 with the Pac-12. That pecking order could actually be a notch up for them compared to the SEC. But that would be a cool bowl game if Mississippi State finishes 7-5, which I expect them to do. If you made me bet $1,000 today, I would bet $1,000 on them losing to Georgia and Ole Miss and beating East Tennessee State. I could go to the Las Vegas Bowl. SEC versus the Pac-12. I'm in. Blake and I had a good time out there in May for the NFL draft. I'm all about that.
Trying to see the latest bowls predictions. This group has Mississippi State playing FSU in the Gator Bowl.
Oh.
Florida State versus Mississippi State in the Gator Bowl. This one has Arkansas headed to Las Vegas.
Oh, well,
it'll be
Jacksonville
at 7-5,
December 30th or whenever that game is. During with the last 2 times I've been there during that time, it's been 80 degrees.
75, perfect. Yeah.
So you get. It's right there. The water comes through the bay, whatever in the hell it is. I mean, it's not an awesome city, but it's easy to get from downtown to the stadium, unlike Miami.
When I asked Steve Robertson, he said the Vegas Bowl is considered one of the bottom bowls by the SEC at this point.
Okay.
So it'll be like a 6-6 team, most likely.
7-5 may get you in.
Potentially, yeah.
I mean, you don't want South Carolina going over you. Or Arkansas, you want to go to the Vegas Bowl. But Jacksonville's not bad. If you missed anything, Apple Podcasts, search the Out of Bounds Show with Bo Bounds. See you tomorrow.